My mother's voice sliced through the phone like she was already done with me. You've been acting like you don't need any of us anymore, Jessica. That ends today. She didn't even pause for breath before the next cut. Maggie showed me the messages. The way you talk about this family when you think no one's listening. Unstable doesn't even cover it. If you want to keep any kind of relationship with us, you will fix this right now. No more hiding behind your husband and your little job. Kimberly never pulls this kind of selfish nonsense. Maybe it's time you started acting like you actually belong in this family instead of trying to tear it apart. Hi, my name is Jessica Lane. I am 30 years old. I sat on the edge of our bed in the small apartment we rented near Balboa Park, phone still pressed to my ear even though the line had gone dead. My mother had hung up on me the second she finished that last sentence. No goodbye, no room for me to answer, just the click and then nothing. Daniel walked in from the kitchen holding 2 mugs of coffee and stopped when he saw my face. He set the mugs down without a word and waited. That was his way. He never pushed. He just stayed close until I could speak. She cut me off, I said finally. The words felt too small for what had just happened. From everything. The family dinners, the group texts, even the money she said she'd help with for the new car. She said Maggie told her I've been talking badly about everyone. That I'm unstable. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice even. Maggie Sullivan. The same Maggie who's been coming to every holiday since you were a kid. I nodded. My hands had started shaking, so I wrapped them around one of the mugs just to have something to hold. The coffee had already gone lukewarm. 2 weeks earlier, everything had still felt normal, or at least the version of normal my family had always demanded. My older sister Kimberly had just announced she was finally ready to buy her first house. My mother had been over the moon talking about how stable and responsible Kimberly was. I had been happy for her too. I really had. Then the calls started. First, it was small things. My mother forgetting to add me to the group chat about Kimberly's housewarming. Then she stopped answering my texts for days at a time. When she finally called back, it was always short-clipped, like she was doing me a favor by picking up at all. I tried to brush it off. I told myself she was just focused on helping Kimberly. But the distance kept growing until that phone call today made it permanent. I spent the rest of the afternoon on the couch with Daniel going over every recent conversation. I could remember trying to figure out what I had said that Maggie could have twisted. Nothing stood out. I had vented to Daniel about how exhausting the constant comparisons were, but I had never said anything to Maggie. I barely even spoke to her at family events anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 in the morning, I opened the old family photo folder on my laptop, the one we all had access to on the shared cloud drive. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just wanted to see if there were pictures from the last gathering that might show whatever messages Maggie had supposedly seen. Most of the photos were the usual stuff. Smiling faces at Thanksgiving, Kimberly cutting a cake, my father in the background looking tired. I clicked through them absently until one thumbnail made me pause. It was a picture of me from 3 years ago at a family barbecue. I was standing near the grill laughing at something. The metadata said it had been taken on June 12th at 4:17 p.m. I remembered that day clearly because it was the weekend Daniel and I had driven down from Los Angeles before we moved to San Diego. We had only stayed a few hours, but the caption someone had added later said something different. It claimed the photo was from last Thanksgiving and that I had been drunk and arguing with everyone. The location data still showed the old address in Los Angeles, not my mother's current house. I sat up straighter. My heart started pounding in that sick, uneven way that makes you feel like you're falling even while you're sitting still. I opened 3 more photos from the same folder. 2 of them had the exact same problem. Wrong dates, wrong locations, captions that described scenes that had never happened. Someone had gone in and edited the metadata and the captions. Not just changed the words, but altered the actual file information so the photos would tell a completely different story. I woke Daniel up. We sat side by side in the dark, scrolling through the folder on my laptop screen. Every time we found another altered photo, the knot in my stomach pulled tighter. It wasn't random. The changes all painted me as someone who showed up to family events already halfway to a breakdown, someone who couldn't be trusted, someone who needed to be managed. The next morning, I called my mother's number 3 times before she finally answered. I didn't even say hello. I just asked her why the family photos had been changed. She laughed, a short, sharp sound that didn't hold any warmth. You're really reaching now, Jessica, accusing me of messing with pictures. That's low even for you. I told her I had the metadata. I told her the dates didn't match any of the events she and Maggie were describing. Her voice dropped into that cold, flat tone she used when she wanted to end a conversation without raising it. If you keep digging into things that don't concern you, you're going to find out exactly how little this family actually owes you. Maggie was right. You need help. And until you get it, you're not welcome at any more gatherings. We're done pretending everything is fine. She hung up again. I stared at the phone in my hand until the screen went black. The silence in the apartment felt too loud. Daniel came and sat next to me on the couch without asking what she had said. He just waited. That was when I realized this wasn't going to blow over. My mother wasn't having a bad week or being dramatic. She had made a decision. She had chosen a version of me that didn't exist, and she was willing to rewrite actual evidence to make everyone else believe it too. I spent the next few days in a strange, jittery state where I kept checking my phone for messages that never came and refreshing the family photo folder like the files might suddenly fix themselves. They didn't. If anything, more captions appeared overnight. The changes were small but consistent, always making me look erratic, always making Kimberly look like the steady one who had to put up with me. At work, I tried to focus on the campaign I was leading. We were launching a new product line, and I had been told quietly that if it went well, I was in line for the team lead role. The raise would have let Daniel and I finally stop renting and put money toward a down payment. I had been working toward that for 2 years. On Thursday afternoon, my boss, Anthony, called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable in a way I had never seen before. He asked if everything was okay at home. He said he had received an email from someone claiming to be a family friend, warning him that I had been having episodes and that the company should be careful about giving me more responsibility. He didn't say the name, but I already knew, Maggie. I told him it wasn't true. I showed him the metadata from the photos on my phone, explained that someone had altered them. Anthony listened, but I could see the doubt in his face. He said he would look into it and asked me to take the rest of the day off to get some rest. I walked out of the building feeling like the floor had shifted under me. The promotion I had been counting on suddenly felt very far away. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with Daniel and told him everything. The altered photos, the call from my mother, the email to my boss. He listened all the way through without interrupting. When I finished, he reached across the table and took both of my hands. We can fight this, he said, but only if you want to. You don't have to keep trying to prove yourself to people who have already decided who you are. I wanted to believe we could fix it. I wanted to believe that if I just showed enough evidence, my mother would stop, that Maggie would back down, that Kimberly would say something. But the longer I sat there, the more I felt the ground giving way. The next morning, I opened the photo folder again. One new picture had been added overnight. It was from my wedding day. The metadata still showed the correct date and location, but someone had added a caption claiming I had been hysterical and ruined the whole day for everyone. The photo itself was just me and Daniel cutting the cake, both of us smiling. I closed the laptop. My hands were steady now, not because I felt calm, but because something inside me had finally gone very quiet. I looked at Daniel across the table. I think I need to talk to someone who isn't family, I said. Someone who can help me understand what's actually happening here before I do anything else. He nodded. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a number I had saved months ago but never used. Dr. Elena Vargas, a therapist Daniel's coworker had recommended when I mentioned how tense things had been getting with my mother. I had told myself I didn't need therapy, that I could handle it. Now I wasn't sure I could handle any of it alone. I hit call before I could talk myself out of it. The line rang twice before a calm voice answered. "This is Elena Vargas." I took a breath that didn't quite fill my lungs. "Hi, my name is Jessica Lane. I think I need to talk to someone about my family. Have you ever watched someone you trusted rewrite your entire life with a few changed captions and a well-timed phone call? What would you have done in that moment when the evidence was right in front of you, but no one else seemed to care? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single one." The call connected, and Dr. Elena Vargas's voice stayed steady even after I told her my mother had just rewritten who I was. She asked if I could come in that afternoon. I said yes before I could change my mind. I sat across from her in a small office 2 hours later, laptop open on the table between us. I showed her the family photo folder first. Elena didn't rush. She asked me to walk through the dates one by one while she noted the mismatches on a pad. When I finished, she leaned back and said the pattern was too clean to be accidental. Someone had spent real time making sure every altered caption pointed at the same story. I was the unstable one who couldn't be trusted with responsibility. I told her about the phone call with my mother and the email that reached my boss. Elena listened without interrupting. Then she asked the question that made the room feel smaller. "What does your mother gain if people believe you're falling apart?" I didn't have an answer yet, but the question stayed with me on the drive home. That night, I showed Daniel the notes Elena had helped me organize. He read them twice. Then he said we needed to decide how far we were willing to push back before it cost us more than we could afford to lose. I didn't want to hear that. I still thought if I could just prove the photos were fake, everything would stop. The next morning, my mother called again. She didn't waste time on hello. "I spoke with Anthony this morning. He seems like a reasonable man. I told him the family has been covering for you for years and that it's time someone protected the people who actually show up for this family." My stomach dropped. I asked her what she thought she was doing. She answered with that same flat calm. "I'm making sure the people who matter know the truth before you drag the rest of us down with you. Kimberly has worked too hard to have her future tied to your episodes. If you keep fighting this, the only person who suffers is you." She hung up before I could answer. I called Anthony immediately. He sounded tired when he picked up. He said my mother had sent him a long email with examples of my behavior. He asked if I wanted to meet to discuss it. I told him I would be there in an hour and that I had proof the examples were lies. He said to bring whatever I had. When I walked into his office, I placed the printed metadata sheets on his desk. I explained the dates, the locations, the captions that had been added later. Anthony looked at the pages for a long time. Then he told me the email from my mother had also included a request that the company reconsider my role on the upcoming campaign because of family concerns about stability. He said he couldn't ignore it completely. He gave me the rest of the week off with pay and told me to get everything sorted before we talked again. I left his office feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under the one part of my life that had still felt solid. On the way home, I stopped at a coffee shop and opened the shared family drive again on my phone. I wasn't looking for more photos this time. I was looking for anything else that might have been changed. That was when I found the folder buried inside another folder. It wasn't photos. It was old bank statements and loan documents my father had scanned years ago. The numbers didn't match anything my mother had ever said out loud. The accounts showed debt that kept growing even while she talked about helping Kimberly buy a house. There were transfers labeled temporary bridge that never seemed to get paid back. One file was a letter from a bank threatening foreclosure on a property I didn't even know they still owned. I sat in the car with the engine off and read until my eyes burned. The story my mother had built about our stable, comfortable family was paper thin. They were leveraged to the edge and had been for years. The support she had offered me in the past had always come with the expectation that I would stay quiet and grateful. Now that I wasn't playing that role, she was cutting the cord and making sure everyone else saw me as the problem instead of the debt. I drove home and showed Daniel the files. He read them without speaking for several minutes. When he finally looked up, his face was set in a way I had only seen once, before the night we decided to move to San Diego against my mother's advice. He said we had two choices. We could keep trying to reason with her and watch her burn everything down around us, or we could decide what we were willing to lose to stop playing her game. I told him I needed one more conversation with my mother before I made that call. He didn't argue. He just said he would be there when I got back. I drove to her house the next afternoon, even though she hadn't invited me. My father answered the door. He looked smaller than I remembered. He stepped aside without asking why I was there. My mother was in the kitchen. She didn't turn around when I walked in. I placed the printed bank statements on the counter between us. I told her I knew the money wasn't real. I told her the photos were fake and that she had used Maggie to spread lies at my job. I asked her what she actually wanted from me. She finally turned. Her expression didn't change. I want you to stop making everything harder than it needs to be. Kimberly is finally in a position to give this family the stability it deserves. You've always been the variable that ruins the picture. If you step back quietly, everyone can move forward. If you don't, I will make sure the people who matter know exactly how much of a liability you are. I asked her if she was willing to destroy my career and my marriage just to protect a lie about money that didn't exist. She smiled then. It was small and cold. I'm willing to protect the only child who understands that family comes with responsibilities. You decided a long time ago that your feelings mattered more than the rest of us. Now you get to live with what that costs. I left without another word. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel the entire drive home. Daniel was waiting on the couch when I walked in. He didn't ask what happened. He just waited for me to speak. I told him everything she had said. Then I told him what I had decided while I was driving back. I was going to gather every document, every altered photo, every lie she had told, and I was going to stop protecting the version of our family that only existed in her head, even if it meant losing the promotion, even if it meant my father never spoke to me again, even if it meant my mother made good on her threat and tried to turn everyone else against me too. Daniel nodded once. He said whatever came next, we would face it together. I opened my laptop and started copying every file from the shared drive onto an external hard drive. I didn't know yet how I was going to use it. I only knew I couldn't keep pretending the story she had written was the truth. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my older sister. It was the first message she had sent me in weeks. It said only 4 words. Mom told me everything. Stay away from us. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I forwarded the message to Elena with one line of my own. I think it's time we talked about what happens next. Elena replied 20 minutes later. She asked if I could come in that afternoon and bring everything I had copied. I said yes. On the way to her office, I stopped at a red light and checked my work email. There was a new message from Anthony. The subject line read, Urgent, Campaign Role Update. I didn't open it. I already knew what it was going to say. The light turned green. I drove straight to Elena's office with the hard drive on the passenger seat beside me. Whatever came out of that meeting, I had already made the choice. I just didn't know yet how much it was going to cost. Elena was already waiting when I arrived, the hard drive plugged into her computer. She had spent the last hour going through every file. When I sat down, she turned the screen toward me and pointed at one of the bank statements. The numbers showed repeated transfers that matched the exact times my mother had claimed she was helping Kimberly. Elena said the pattern was clear. My mother had been moving money around to keep up appearances while telling everyone else the family was stable and I was the one creating problems. I asked her what I was supposed to do with that information. Elena didn't give me a neat answer. She said I could keep trying to negotiate with someone who had already decided the truth didn't matter, or I could make the evidence impossible to ignore and then decide what I was willing to lose. She asked me what I actually wanted, not what would make my mother stop, what I wanted for myself. I told her I wanted to stop being the person everyone else got to rewrite. I wanted my boss to know the truth so the rumors couldn't touch the work I had done. And I wanted my mother to know that I saw exactly what she had done. Elena nodded once. She said if that was the choice, I needed to be ready for the cost. She asked if I was willing to accept that my mother might never speak to me again and that my father might choose to stay silent rather than stand between us. I said I already knew that was possible. What I didn't know was whether I could keep living inside the story my mother had written about me. That afternoon, I forwarded the financial documents and the metadata sheets to Anthony with one sentence. This is what my mother sent you. Here's the proof it was never about me. He replied 2 hours later, asking me to come in the next morning. I went home and told Daniel what I had done. He listened all the way through. Then he said whatever happened at work tomorrow, we would figure out the rest together. I slept for the first time in weeks. The next morning, Anthony had the documents printed and spread across his desk. He told me he had already spoken with HR. The email from my mother would be kept on file as an external complaint with no further action. He also said the team lead role on the new campaign had gone to someone else because the launch timeline couldn't wait for the situation to settle. He offered me a different project with the same pay and told me he still believed in the work I had done. I thanked him and said I understood. When I walked out of the building, I didn't feel relieved. I felt the weight of the choice settling in. The promotion I had worked toward was gone. Not because I had failed at the job, but because I had refused to stay quiet. That evening, I called my mother one last time. I told her I had sent the bank statements and the altered photo metadata to my boss. I told her I was done protecting the version of our family that only existed in her head. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said the words that made everything final. You just made sure you will never be welcome in this house again. Kimberly doesn't need your drama, neither do I. If you ever contact any of us again, I will make sure every person we know hears exactly how far you were willing to go to destroy this family. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The line went dead, and I knew it was the last time I would hear her speak to me. I sat on the couch with Daniel afterward and told him what she had said. He didn't try to fix it. He just held my hand while I cried for the first time since the whole thing started. When I could speak again, I told him I was choosing to walk away completely. No more trying to prove myself. No more waiting for my father to say something. No more hoping my sister would push back. I was done. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. My mother kept her word. The family group chat stopped, including me. My father never called. Kimberly sent one final text telling me she hoped I got the help I needed. I didn't answer any of them. Work became something I showed up for and then left. The new project was fine. It wasn't the role I had wanted, but it was steady. Daniel and I started looking at apartments farther from Balboa Park, places where no one from my old life would accidentally run into us. We didn't talk about my mother much. There wasn't anything left to say. 3 months later, I heard through a mutual contact that my mother had used the story of my breakdown to explain why the family needed extra support for Kimberly's house purchase. People felt sorry for her. They stepped in. The loan that had been threatening foreclosure got quietly handled. My mother got exactly what she had been maneuvering toward the entire time. Kimberly got her house. The family image stayed intact for everyone who mattered to them. I sat with that information for a long time. It should have made me angry. Instead, it felt like the final piece clicking into place. My mother had never been protecting stability. She had been protecting the story that let her keep moving money and appearances around without anyone asking questions. I had become the convenient problem she could point to when the numbers didn't add up. Daniel asked me one night if I regretted sending the documents. I told him I didn't. The cost had been real. I had lost the promotion, the last thread of connection to my father, and any chance of a different ending with my mother. But I had also stopped being the person she got to rewrite whenever it was convenient. That choice had been painful. It still was. It was also the only one that let me breathe without waiting for the next call or the next altered photo. We signed a lease on a small house 2 neighborhoods over. It wasn't bigger or nicer, it was just ours. No shared drives, no family photos that could be rewritten, no one who could call my boss and rewrite my work life. On the day we moved the last box in, I stood in the empty living room and realized the silence didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like space. I still think about my mother sometimes, not with anger, with a kind of detached clarity. She won the short game. She protected the lie long enough to get what she wanted for my sister, but she also made sure I would never again be the person she could use as the excuse. That was the trade. I paid it willingly once I understood the cost. If you are listening to this and you are still trying to reason with someone who has already decided you are the problem, I want you to hear this. You do not have to keep proving your version of the truth to people who need you to be the villain. You can choose the painful version of freedom. You can let the story they wrote about you end without your participation. It will cost you. It may cost you more than you think you can stand. But the alternative is spending the rest of your life inside a narrative someone else controls. Thank you for listening to my story. What would you have done when you realized the only way to stop the rewriting was to walk away from everything that still connected you to the people who needed you to stay broken?